The chamber was silent, yet the silence carried weight, an unbearable heaviness that pressed against the walls, the floor, even the trembling breath of the young woman seated upon the jeweled bed. Candles flickered nervously, their light dancing across silks and shadows, as if they too sensed the terror of what was about to unfold. For the concubine, this was no night of romance. It was judgment night. Her fate hung on the emperor's whim, a single encounter that could make her a queen or a corpse. History remembers these first nights not as moments of passion, but as trials of power. Some concubines awoke to unimaginable wealth, their influence stretching deep into the veins of empire. Others were never seen again, discarded like broken objects, their names erased from memory. The emperor's desire was law, and his displeasure could be a death sentence. Imagine the crushing weight of uncertainty. The concubine had been trained, polished, and presented like an offering, but nothing could prepare her for the unpredictable storm of a ruler's moods. Was she to smile sweetly or remain demure, to speak or to stay silent? Every gesture carried the weight of life and death. She was not merely entering a bedchamber, she was stepping into a battlefield where her body was both the weapon and the prize. And as the emperor's footsteps echoed closer, she knew that her destiny would be sealed before dawn. For her, dawn could mean a palace of gold or a grave of silence. Such was the terror of the first night, a terror that has echoed across centuries, in palaces from Delhi to Istanbul, from Beijing to Rome. This was the cruel paradox of the harem. Behind silken curtains and perfumed halls lay fear, control, and unimaginable vulnerability. The glittering world of jewels and luxury was only a mask. Beneath it, the truth was raw and merciless. Concubines were trapped in a game they could never control. And so, the first night became a ritual of dread. For the emperor, it was power displayed. For the concubine, it was a gamble between survival and destruction. But how did such practices begin? Why did emperors surround themselves with countless women, only to reduce them to pawns in a brutal contest for favor? To answer that, we must look deeper, behind the closed palace doors, where secrecy and politics shaped every night of terror that followed. Behind the gilded gates of empires, the harem was more than a private pleasure chamber. It was an institution, a carefully engineered mechanism of power, control, and survival. To understand the terror of the first night, we must first understand why the emperors built such worlds of secrecy. In the Mughal courts, in Ottoman palaces, and across the vast dynasties of China, concubines were not merely women of beauty, they were currency. They represented alliances between powerful families, trophies of conquest, and symbols of the emperor's divine right to possess everything under heaven. Each concubine added to his prestige, proof of his unmatched wealth and authority. A ruler who could command hundreds of women demonstrated a dominance no rival could match. But entry into the harem was not a simple matter of desire. Women were chosen with ruthless precision. Some were captured in war, others gifted by regional rulers seeking favor. Many were handpicked for their beauty, intelligence, or even astrological compatibility. Eunuchs, loyal only to the emperor, oversaw the selection process, ensuring that every detail, from skin tone to demeanor, aligned with the ruler's desires. To be chosen was both an honor and a curse. It meant elevation from obscurity, yet immediate surrender of freedom. Once inside, the concubines lived under an intricate hierarchy. At the top stood the empress or chief consort, below her, the favored concubines, and beneath them, countless others who might never even see the emperor's face. But no matter their rank, each woman carried the same fear: the first night. It was not just intimacy, it was an unspoken trial. How she performed could determine whether she rose to power or was condemned to irrelevance. This trial served more than the emperor's appetite. It was a test of obedience. A ruler surrounded by enemies and conspiracies sought absolute control, and the harem was a mirror of his empire. Concubines who pleased him became trusted allies, wielding soft power in palace politics. Those who faltered vanished quietly, as though they had never existed. In this way, the first night was not a personal encounter. It was statecraft disguised as seduction. Behind the curtains of silk, the harem became a theater where loyalty, fear, and survival played out night after night. To outsiders, it appeared as a paradise of beauty and luxury. But to those within, it was a cage lined with jewels, where every breath was measured and every glance carried consequence. And as the emperor crossed the threshold into a concubine's chamber, both knew the truth. This was less about passion than about power. Her trembling silence, his commanding presence, it was a performance written by centuries of tradition and politics. Yet even in such a controlled world, the rituals of these encounters carried their own strange power. Before the emperor arrived, preparations were made with terrifying precision. These rituals revealed much about what the night was truly meant to be, not intimacy, but submission. The night did not begin with the emperor's arrival. It began hours earlier, in rituals designed to strip the concubine of her humanity and reshape her into an object of awe and submission. What followed was not preparation for love, but preparation for power. First came the cleansing. The concubine was led to a marble bath, often filled with rosewater, sandalwood, or rare oils brought from across the empire. Eunuchs, sworn never to betray the emperor's secrets, attended to her. Their hands were clinical, removing every trace of sweat or dust, scrubbing her body until it glowed beneath the lamplight. She was not bathing for herself. She was being polished like a gemstone, offered up for inspection. The very act reminded her that her body no longer belonged to her. It belonged to the emperor, and tonight it would be tested. Next came the dressing. Silks finer than anything she had ever touched were draped over her frame, embroidered with gold thread that caught the firelight. Jewels hung heavy upon her neck and wrists, weighing her down as though reminding her of the empire's chains. Eunuchs painted her eyes with kohl, perfumed her hair with musk, and instructed her in every detail how to bow, when to look up, when to remain silent. Each command was rehearsed like a ritualistic dance, because one mistake, one hesitation, could mean disgrace or death. Then came the waiting. The concubine was placed in a chamber drenched in incense, where the very air seemed designed to intoxicate. Musicians might play softly in the distance, though the melodies only heightened the tension. She waited, not knowing whether the emperor would arrive smiling or scowling, kind or cruel. In that long silence, every heartbeat felt like a countdown to judgment. Across empires, these rituals bore uncanny similarities. In the Ottoman courts, concubines were paraded through the harem gardens, their beauty displayed like offerings before the sultan made his choice. In the forbidden city of China, the chosen woman would be carried on a special bed to the emperor's chamber, stripped of her own will as attendants managed her every step. In Mughal palaces, favored concubines were sometimes presented like divine offerings, adorned with jewels that once decorated idols in conquered temples. Different cultures, yet the same theme: the emperor as god, the concubine as sacrifice. And when the emperor finally entered, the performance reached its climax. This was not a meeting of equals, it was theater. The silks, the perfumes, the jewels, the music, all existed to magnify his presence and diminish hers. What appeared, from the outside, to be a night of passion was in truth a carefully orchestrated ritual of domination. The concubine was expected to yield completely, to embody both beauty and submission, to become whatever pleased the emperor in that fleeting moment. Yet, beneath the shimmer of ritual, fear never left her. Because rituals were not protection, they were reminders. The bath reminded her she was property. The jewels reminded her she was weighed down by the empire's will. The silence reminded her that her voice could cost her life. And so, while poets of the age wrote of beauty and romance, the women themselves knew a darker truth. These nights were never truly about love. They were about survival, and survival depended on pleasing a man whose whims could crown or kill. But what happened when a concubine failed, when fear silenced her, when hesitation angered him, when she could not fulfill the role she had been forced to play? The rituals of seduction quickly turned into instruments of punishment. For every concubine who rose to favor, countless others met a fate too grim to speak of. The first night, wrapped in gold and silk, could so easily dissolve into horror by dawn. In the eyes of the emperor, a concubine was not a person. She was an experiment. If she failed, she was discarded, punished, or erased. The cruelty lay in its unpredictability. Sometimes, displeasure meant nothing more than being sent back into the endless ranks of the harem, condemned to live in silence, never again summoned. Yet this too was a living death. Forgotten women wasted away in isolation, stripped of hope, trapped in luxury that felt more like a prison. Others faced harsher fates. In the Ottoman courts, records whisper of concubines drowned in the Bosphorus, their bodies weighted and left to vanish beneath the waves. In China, the penalty for disobedience could be execution by strangulation with a silk cord, a death as silent as the shame it represented. Mughal chronicles hint at women banished to remote fortresses, where their beauty withered in solitude, unseen by the world. Punishment was not always physical, it was psychological. To be humiliated, stripped of silks, reduced to a servant among women who once envied you, was its own form of execution. Concubines learned quickly that the emperor's smile could transform into cruelty without warning. A single wrong word, a glance at the wrong time, even a gesture misinterpreted could summon death. Consider Emperor Yongle of Ming China, who demanded that concubines who displeased him be buried alive to accompany him in death. Or Sultan Ibrahim of the Ottomans, who once ordered the drowning of dozens of concubines on suspicion of betrayal. Power was absolute, and fear was the leash that bound obedience. Yet what made the punishments most terrifying was their secrecy. There were no trials, no witnesses. One night, a woman was there, adorned in jewels. The next morning, her chamber was empty, her name forbidden from being spoken. The harem consumed its own, and silence was enforced as strictly as devotion. This razor-thin line between privilege and peril was the essence of the first night's terror. To the emperor, concubines were possessions, easily replaced. To the women, survival depended on perfect obedience, yet even perfection offered no guarantee. The emperor's will was law, and law could turn merciless in an instant. And so, the rituals of beauty, of seduction, of trembling submission, all carried a shadow. The unspoken knowledge that if she faltered, her life would end as swiftly as her night had begun. But behind these brutal records, there lies another story, one less documented, yet far more haunting. What did it feel like to stand in that chamber, stripped of choice, waiting for footsteps that could signal either glory or death? To answer this, we must step into the mind of the concubine herself and hear the whispers of her fear. The chamber was heavy with silence. She sat alone, her hands trembling against the silk cushions, her heart hammering so loudly she feared it would betray her. Tonight was not hers, it belonged to him. And she knew her body, her breath, even her soul were no longer her own. She whispered silent prayers, not for love, but for survival, for the chance to see another sunrise, for the hope that his eyes would soften, that his touch would not become cruelty. The women who had gone before her never spoke of what happened on their nights, but their absence spoke louder than words. Some had vanished without a trace. Others returned, their faces pale, their voices broken, never to be called again. She thought of her mother, of her childhood, of the life stolen from her the moment she entered the palace. Tonight, she would be transformed into a favored jewel or into a forgotten shadow. There was no in-between. When the door creaked open and the emperor stepped inside, her breath caught in her throat. Every movement she made had to be perfect, every smile calculated, every glance weighed. To falter was to die, to obey was to survive. She was not a woman anymore. She was a mirror reflecting his power, a vessel for his will. And as the candles flickered, she realized the cruelest truth of all. History would never remember her name. She was not a queen, not a wife, not even a concubine to be praised. She was a shadow, swallowed by the empire's silence. Yet even in her silence, her fear speaks across the centuries. It reminds us that behind every tale of emperors and their glory, there were women whose voices were stolen, whose stories were buried. Tonight, her whisper still lingers, echoing through time. But what does her silence mean for us today? What lessons remain in these shadows, waiting for us to confront? The story of the concubine's first night may seem distant, buried in the palaces of long-dead emperors. Yet, its echoes are not confined to history. The dynamics of power, control, and silencing that ruled those chambers still shape our world today. At its core, the first night was not about intimacy, it was about domination. A woman's worth was measured by her ability to please, her body treated as a tool, her silence demanded as the price of survival. And though centuries have passed, these same patterns emerge in modern forms. From boardrooms to film sets, from politics to private lives, powerful men have continued to exploit those beneath them, reminding us that unchecked authority often feeds on vulnerability. The harem's secrecy mirrors the silence of today's victims. Then, concubines could not speak of their pain, their voices erased by fear of death. Now, women who challenge abuse face ridicule, disbelief, or retaliation. The methods differ, but the outcome remains chillingly familiar. Silence is enforced, truth is buried, and power thrives in the shadows. History also teaches us the cost of forgetting. The grandeur of the Mughal courts, the splendor of the Ottoman palaces, the glory of Chinese dynasties, all are remembered. But the women, the countless concubines who lived and died unseen, are lost in the margins. To tell their stories is not only to honor their suffering, it is to confront the darker face of human ambition. Because the lesson is not about emperors alone, it is about us. What happens when a society allows power to go unquestioned? When wealth, status, or divine right excuses cruelty? The concubine's terror warns us that unchecked authority, whether in a throne room or a modern institution, always leads to dehumanization. And so, her whisper becomes a warning, to see her not only as a victim of the past, but as a mirror reflecting our present. To remember that behind every glittering facade, there may lie fear and silence. To recognize that progress is not guaranteed, and that the struggles of forgotten women still echo in the voices of those who fight for justice today. The emperors believed themselves untouchable, their power eternal, yet their dynasties fell, their palaces crumbled, and their names are remembered as much for their cruelty as for their conquests. The women, though nameless, endure as symbols of resilience, haunting reminders that behind every empire's greatness stood those who bore its hidden costs. And so, the story matters still, not as a relic of the past, but as a living truth. Power without compassion destroys, silence enables cruelty, and history will always remember both the splendor and the shadows.